stories with open data. Sam Popowich has been the Discovery Systems Librarian at the University of Alberta since 2011, has been programming in Ruby since about 2006. Please join me in welcoming Sarah and Sam.
Thanks, everybody. I'm too short. Okay. Gotcha. So, Sarah and I had come up with this idea sometime earlier in the spring. It sort of grew out of me thinking a lot about librarians coding, what does it mean for librarians to learn to code, who might benefit from learning to code, and how could we go about doing some of that. There are a lot of pressures, time pressures, professional commitments, things like that. I've been involved in some software carpentry stuff, some ladies learning code workshops, and that's a particular model for being able to share programming knowledge and build skills. But what I sort of had the idea of at one point was, what if there was a way that we could start doing pair programming at a distance among librarians for people who wanted to learn? So I sort of put that out there on Twitter, and then Sarah jumped in and said, that would be awesome, why don't we give that a shot? And then eventually we managed to get it going. So what is pair programming? Pair programming started out in the software development world. It's an agile practice. And before the development of a lot of new technologies and improvement in bandwidth, pair programming tended to be face-to-face. So you'd have two developers sitting at one machine. One would be the driver, who would be writing the code. The other would be contributing ideas. They would be sharing information. They'd be kicking ideas around, passing information back and forth. And in principle, that practice combined with other agile practices like test-driven development would lead to higher quality of code, faster production, more satisfied developers, as well as knowledge sharing and reduction of single points of failure. Gradually, as technology and bandwidth improved, virtual pair programming came about. So that's essentially just pair programming over the internet using particular collaboration tools. In the Ruby world, the Ruby community, that's sort of what I'm mostly interested in, Avdi Grimm, who was a software developer, professional software developer, and now primarily does mentoring and consultant work, had a system set up where people could sign up to pair program with him, and they would learn particular aspects of Ruby that they might not be able to learn on their own. They would work through some things with him. Is this me too?
Yeah.
So I talked a little bit about my interest in pair programming, looking at it as one more model of mentoring and skill building and capacity building, so that when I get called out in library podcasts about librarians learning how to code, I actually have a little bit of experience around how does some of this stuff work. I also love pair programming. I love the idea of test-driven development and refactoring, and sitting in my office working on projects, a lot of which are sort of small and particular to me. I don't have a lot of chance to share some of that or talk to other people or get any information from them. And it was nice to be able to formulate some of that stuff as I worked with Sarah through some of this kind of thing. You want to add something?
Yeah, sure. So I'll add. So my motivations, I'm a liaison librarian in the classic tradition of liaison librarianship. I work mostly with maps and geospatial data. And so digital projects I have to kind of go looking for. They don't always come to me. And I really like the idea of working with Sam and finding out more about the type of work that you do, your thought processes behind how you can kind of conceive of a project and actually go ahead and create it. I'd done a little programming before, but it was mostly just kind of on my own machine, writing some little scripts. And I kind of wanted to get a better idea of what it looks like to make larger projects that are intended for a bigger audience, and just get to know that process. So this was really exciting for me, and I'm really glad we had this opportunity on Twitter.
So after discussing a little bit over email about how we might work, we also started to talk to Kim Pham, who I think is still at the back hiding, about ways that we might be able to collaborate on a project so that we could get our heads around how linked data works and get some practical experience doing some of that. So the setup that we used for that project was something that Sarah and I were able to piggyback on when we managed to get the pair programming things off the ground. So what we ended up doing was using a virtual machine provided by Canary. There's an organization in Alberta that provides free access to virtual machines for, I think, anyone in post-secondary, but certainly people at University of Calgary and University of Edmonton. So I got one of those. We used Ansible to install the operating system and set up the basic packaging, set up SSH keys for Sarah and Kim on the virtual machine. Sarah and I used Google Hangout for face-to-face communication. We also used Google Hangout to do screen sharing so that if one of us is working on a program, the other one could follow along on the screen. Kim introduced us to Slack so that we could share information, communicate about the project. And we used Tmux, which is essentially a screen, how would you describe it? A terminal multiplexer, because that clears it up for everybody. It's a terminal multiplexer. It multiplexes your terminals. And when we got together, I think we got together for about 4 sessions of approximately an hour each. As I say, I'm interested in test-driven development and refactoring. So I had some Ruby code that I had written for a project that I needed to do, which was to essentially update one list of library locations that was out of date with a more up-to-date version and send it off to EBSCO. So we did a little bit of work on that. That was Ruby code, added some basic tests, and then once we had the tests in place, we were able to safely refactor the code. And I'll show you that in just a second. But then there's also...
Yeah, so we did a little work, a little Unix work, a little infrastructure work. We each took turns installing different pieces of our sort of Fedora Fuseki ecosystem for working with linked data a little bit in that context. I spent a lot of time just kind of learning from Sam some shortcuts in Vim and some other tools like that, just to see how he was kind of able to work in a more streamlined sort of fashion. And then we did a little bit of Git and GitHub practice as well. I know somebody yesterday was kind of touching on what's a good way to kind of work collaboratively and share code with team members, and so we kind of got in the habit of using Git a little bit.
So I'm spreading the gospel of Vim. So you probably can't read this. I assume you can't read it. This is just a Ruby mini-test setup. I had written the code in non-good test-driven development fashion by writing all the code, not worrying about any tests. But I knew it worked because I had the output list of library locations. So I was able to harness that, so to have known good output, which at least gave me a basic kind of smoke test. And then we worked through that, talked about some of the processes around testing, some of the ways you would design tests for particular pieces of code, what over-testing is, what under-testing is, a little bit of that. Here's the code as it started out. So it was very basic. It's pretty much just a bash script written in Ruby. It runs through various things, opens 2 location files, merges them together, and then spits them out. And then after some refactoring, and I know you definitely can't read that one, we ended up with this, which is object-oriented. So it's not just a script, so it can be used as a library if you had to reuse this code. It does a little bit of encapsulation of private methods, and it's just generally clearer and easier to read. The fact that it's longer is actually probably a good thing in the long run. Talk about this?
Yeah, I guess we can kind of do it together. Okay. So we worked with Kim Pham at UT Scarborough on a project. We were really inspired by the LinkJazz project, the famous LinkJazz project. And wanted to kind of test our knowledge, I guess, of some linked data fundamentals by playing around with some data from about folk musicians and their songs and their albums and recordings and so on. So we had this lofty idea earlier in the summer, and then the summer happened, that we kind of wanted to represent some of these concepts using linked data. So for us, it was a kind of a good way to get familiar with working with linked data concepts and the tools and the processes that exist. I felt like kind of conceptually we had an okay understanding of how everything worked, but in practice there were a lot of things that we had to do to set up to kind of actually get things working. So it was really good for us to actually give it a whirl and see what it looks like to write some Sparkle queries and to get some data back.
And one thing that Tmux allows you to do, so we had Tmux installed on the server that we were putting Fedora and Fuzeki on, is it allows you to multiplex your terminals, but it also means that if multiple people are logged into the same server, they can attach to the same Tmux session so that we can each see what the other person is typing. So if one of us was taking the lead on installing a particular piece of software like Fuzeki or ingesting data, the other ones could follow along as we were doing that on the screen, which was pretty cool. This is you.
Sure, yeah. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of different ways that we can learn from each other online. We talked a little bit about pair programming today. There's, of course, the Hackfest model, so if you're around on Tuesday, maybe you participated. It's a great way to get things done in kind of an intense little burst and to try something different. There's also the idea of code reading groups, and I belong to one of those that I'm going to talk about in just a second. I found this to be a really great practice for kind of familiarizing myself with different code bases and different ways that people write scripts in a library environment. Sam's going to talk a little bit in a second about Birds of a Feather and some sessions that they do at the University of Alberta. And just a shout out for documentation in general. I think as somebody who's learning, I'm always looking stuff up online and seeing questions and answers that people have left for me on the internet. So just a reminder that it's always great to write down what you're doing and what works and to participate in this wonderful community that we have. Still me. So I belong to a code reading group that started with the LibTech Women community online. We were inspired by Saran Yitbarek, who is a person who graduated from a Ruby boot camp. And she's really great. She gave some really interesting talks. She runs a podcast called Code Newbies, I believe. And she started a code reading group for graduates of this Ruby boot camp. So they would get together once a week and read through a code base about 100 lines long to sort of reinforce concepts that they were learning at this boot camp. And so we decided to do the same thing, but virtually. So we get together for 1 hour once a week. We use Google Hangouts. We have a weekly tour guide who chooses a script or a code base or something for us to look through. And what we do is we read through line by line. And we're trying to figure out what the person was intending, how they've structured their code, learn a little bit about the languages that they're using. You can focus on one language, you can focus on many different languages. We kind of focus on a lot. We have people who have backgrounds in PHP and JavaScript and Ruby and Python and everything. So it's been great for us to kind of get a sense of all the options we have out there. And you can look at library scripts or others. We've looked at everything. We've looked at IRC bots, Twitter bots. We've looked at browser extensions. We've looked at Twerk for Twitter archiving, what I like to call the Ed Summers back catalog of wonderful scripts that are posted online in GitHub. And if you're interested in the session or in starting one of your own, I recommend taking a look at Coral Sheldon Hess's talk from Code for Lib 2015 in Portland this year, which is a really great overview of kind of how to set up these sessions and to run them yourselves.
And I just want to talk a little bit more about the Birds of a Feather sessions. Tricia mentioned them yesterday in the panel that Kenton, Peter, Tricia, and Alan did yesterday. Basically, the developers and the sysadmins at University of Alberta libraries get together once a week. Some of it is code reading, but we also do just sort of high-level kicking around of ideas, talking through problems, sometimes some pretty forensic code analysis. Quite often, when you're implementing systems like Blacklight and Hydra, which have sort of large, intertwined code bases, it's difficult to trace where something is happening. So we've done quite a lot of that. And I would like to see, one of the things that I would like to see, we've done that in person, but it would be great to see sort of Google Hangouts I know that virtual collaboration is done sort of with the, especially in the Highland Aura community, we see that quite a lot, and in the Hydra world. But I would like to see that sort of informally among different groups where we get together and just sort of kick ideas around, do some code reading, and have those as mutual skill sharing sessions or mutual collaboration sessions.
Great. So just some things that we learned. Scheduling was tricky. We started this over the summer, and so with vacations and other projects, U of A launched you were launching a new website during this time. I got some new subject areas to look after. So it was really easy to put this project on the back burner. It was never the thing that was of top of mind. So I think in future it'd be great to kind of really make an effort to carve out some time and to get some work done on the project. I found it really helpful to see how others work, Sam and Kim, and learning from them and how they approached a problem and how they thought. I thought it was a very friendly and supportive environment. I felt very comfortable asking questions and just being like, how does this work? And everybody would help and kind of contribute ideas. So I found it to be a really fantastic experience overall. And just to say that the community is really great too. Like, we wouldn't have done this had we not been talking on Twitter. We wouldn't have had all these code bases to look at had people like Ed Summers not posted all of those great scripts online for us to take a look at. Code reading group wouldn't have gotten together if it weren't for social media. So, community is key, and it's the work that all of you do that really kind of helps new people learn and become part of it. So I just wanted to thank all of you for being here and for being so supportive and for putting all of your stuff online.
And I just wanted to add that this could sort of very easily have turned into me telling Sarah what to do. And I don't think it was that. Sarah brought a lot of skill and a lot of experience in what she does in areas that I typically don't get a lot of opportunity to work around in. So it was really great to be able to share some time, to devote an hour every so often to working on a particular problem, to learn from her. And I think that's, in a lot of the discussions around librarians learning to code, the challenges come up a lot. We noticed the fact that we each have full working lives meant that it was difficult to schedule and to stick to time. It's difficult to think in terms of self-learning, self-teaching, when there's already plenty in our daily lives that's new that we have to stay on top of. It's nice to have somebody that you can go to share some of those concerns with, to work through some problems tentatively, not necessarily to have anything deliverable at the end, not necessarily to have anything that you're going to be putting on your resume or in your annual report. It was nice to have that kind of informal back and forth that we could both benefit from. I think that's it.
That's it. Thank you very much.
Did you get any institutional support for this? In terms of time or resources or anything?
I did it at work when I could make the time. So I had to sort of push other things around to be able to do it. I don't know about Sam.
I think for me, there's the privileged position of just being able to decide on my own time, how my time is being spent. So institutional support was definitely the time I was allowed to spend on it, and the freedom to be able to make my own decisions around that. So that's great. It would be cool to have a little more formal support. It's not that we asked for it and didn't get it. My supervisor's right over there. But it would be great if maybe there was some infrastructure behind something like that.
I could just supplement the list of approaches you had for code reading. One unexpected benefit of a more formal GitHub-based process that we found in the Hydra group is once you're managing everything as pull requests and you're really organizing the way changes go into the code base on the basis of pull requests become really useful units to study, because you can see a complex problem being solved that might mean touching files from all the, lots and lots of files from lots and lots of levels. And that makes a really nice little case study on how to make a change.
Baby steps, Peter.
I'm curious if you looked at any of the kind of web-based collaborative code editors that are out there for doing this kind of work. I'm thinking particularly of CodeBlocks because there's an open source version of that that you can run that multiple people can connect to. I've used that for a few projects in the past.
I looked into some of that, especially sort of, those are the kinds of things that are used a lot in the Ruby world, kind of for distributed collaboration. I looked at them. I kind of liked the idea of just using tools we were already using, like Google Hangouts on the one hand and Tmux on my side. I think, assuming we kind of keep this going, I think we will look at other options for sure.
Thanks. Great talk. Sarah, did you mention a podcast?
Yeah, I think it's called the Code Newbies podcast. That's where I first found out about the Code Reading Club.
Code Newbies also does a Twitter chat. It seems to be every once a week. That's kind of interesting to follow. We're both on Twitter a lot. That's probably good for us.
Thank you very much.